Hey, this is Todd. I wanted to have a quick video to discuss what to do with players. Specifically, the idea that you can't correct player issues with in-game character solutions. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes in our games, we have players who are different types, different styles. Everyone likes to play a game differently. And we hope that through the game, or when we put the table together and we pitch our campaign and we start playing, that will all of us be more or less on the same page. Of course, often that doesn't happen. Either we don't do a good job communicating the type of game we're playing, or it's possible that we simply don't enjoy the same kinds of games, and more than that, that we don't know that we don't enjoy the same sorts of games. Oftentimes when you're communicating, we don't have the exact language at hand to be able to say what sort of game we want as a player or as a GM. It's a difficult thing. We oftentimes don't know what it is, particularly if you're a new GM or you're a new player. You may think you want a game that's like one way, but the reality is you like a game that's another way. You may not know the type of game that you like, and you may not know how to communicate what that type of game is. It takes a while being in the hobby, reading, talking to people, that you pick up the terms that you can use to communicate the type of game you like, whether it's a sandbox game, or it's a heavy narrative game, or it's a game that features lots of combat, or it's a game that features lots of role-playing, or any of the various types of games that fit in within that spectrum. It could be a setting thing. Some people like high magic, some people like low magic, some people like it really gritty, some people like it really fantastic, or with lots of character deaths, with no character deaths, with character deaths only occurring in plot moments. The list goes on and on. The point is that at any moment when you're playing your game, you may start to run across issues with a player, and conversely, if you're a player, you may run across issues with your GM. And these issues are often going to arise out of these differences between you as individuals. And when these differences come up, you can't fix them by doing things with your character or doing things to their character. If I have a party and they are murder hobos and they'll be murder hobos, that is not character oriented. They may justify it with what their character's doing. Oh, my character is a paladin of conquest, so this works perfectly for him. And oh, I'm a rogue, and that works perfectly for them. But that's really what they're doing, is justifying the way that they like to play, rather than I'm a paladin of conquest, therefore I'm going to do this, even if I as a player don't really want to. That's a different argument. If they're playing within their character, that's one thing. But usually what we're talking about, and what really comes up most often, is that players are going to gravitate to play the kind of game that they like. And that's going to go across different characters. And it's going to go across their game. It's going to basically define the sort of experience that they're having. And it's not going to matter what's happening in the game. It's not going to matter whether they're playing a paladin or whether they're playing a bard or whether they're this or that. They're going to find a way to get into that groove that they like. Whether that groove is lots of role-playing, whether that groove is lots of killing. Whatever that groove is, they're going to try to do that. And if it's working and everybody's in similar grooves, or grooves that at least cooperate with each other, that's great. But of course, what I'm talking about here, and probably what leads people to looking online for answers, is not when everybody's working towards the same thing. It's when you're at cross purposes, when you as a GM want a lot of RP, but the party or individual players want lots of combat. The easiest solution is just to force the party into RP situations. Well, I'm going to take them out of these combat situations and I'm going to put them in all these social situations, and that will get me what I want. And it will. Unless they decide to murder hobo their way through those encounters, sure. But it's probably not going to be a fulfilling situation, because one, you're forcing something onto them that they may not want, or some of them may not want the other one. So the ones that don't want it are probably not going to be super engaged by that. So you take them out of these situations where they're fighting stuff, which is what they want, and you're putting them into this social situations where they're going to talk to people. Well, probably the people who don't want to talk aren't going to talk. Or they're going to do the least amount of talking they need to. They're going to try to withdraw out of the situation as fast as possible so they can go back to doing what they want to do. So if you have one character or one player in your party that doesn't want the social situations, they're probably going to go quiet. or they're just going to, how fast can they end this conversation so we can get back to the dungeon. Same thing in the inverse. If you're finding that you want combat and you have all these people who want social stuff and you try to push the combat on, they're going to try to weasel out of that combat. They're going to try to, let me keep talking to them. Let me not fight them. Let me run away. Let's just not go to that dangerous place because I don't want to fight anything. So by pushing them in there in-game, you aren't solving the situation, number one, because you're not changing what they like to do. If these people like to socialize and you want combat, or you want to socialize and they want combat, you're not addressing any of that by pushing the situations in the game. You're going to tend to just make the people who weren't going to be engaged in it anyway just bring that unengagement out. They're just going to become more unengaged, and potentially they could, essentially infect or affect other players who may be engaged with that because they're not. So in the situation where you have a fighter who wants combat, but you have a bard and they love social, when the bard is in their social element, not only could the fighter be non-engaged, but they may actually make it a lesser experience for the bard because they're introducing the wrong kind of tension where they just want to end the scene, they just want to pull out. Maybe they want to try to turn it into a fight, and you have the bard character and you may be engaged with them, and it's just throwing you off because they can't get into it because the fighter's not into it. And the same thing could be happening in a combat situation when the fighter is super engaged. The bard's always trying to weasel out, get out of it, end it fast, or just avoid it. And they're butting heads, and maybe they're butting heads with you, they're butting heads with each other. It's not this kind of situation that you want. It's just going to lead to a less fun experience all around. And the answer, of course, is talk to the players. Can't solve it with the characters. As I just went through multiple examples, whatever you do with the characters is only going to, one, it's only going to address the symptom, which is what's happening in the game. Two, it's not going to fix even that symptom because whichever members of the party or you or whichever individuals at the table are not engaged by that element, when that element's pushed on them, they're just not going to be engaged. And they could potentially ruin the engagement for others. But, of course, talking to people is the hardest part of the game because it's one thing to do things in character that gives you a little bit of a wall between you, right? So you're able to set this wall up. I'm not talking, it's this persona who's talking to you as a player. It's not me, it's my character. That gives you a little bit of safety. When you come and you say, hey, let's talk about it mano a mano or as a table, let's really address this, that is much more difficult, which I get. But it's the only real way that you're going to get to the bottom of it. And there are a couple of things that can happen out of that conversation. Hopefully you find a middle ground. Maybe there's some kind of misunderstanding and you find that the person who you think is not engaged is just shy, or they have something else, some other barrier that's preventing them from getting involved in this element that you like, and you can work towards overcoming that barrier. Maybe you can find ways that they don't like to talk, they're not good at public speaking, that's not something they want to do, so they tend to shy away and they prefer combat because they can just say what they're doing. You could actually use that in social situations. You can say, instead of having to have someone make a speech in the first person, they can simply say, hey, my fighter tries to convince them to help us because it will help them. Great, roll diplomacy. That's perfectly fine. Not everybody has to go and give flowery St. Crispin's Day speeches all the time, but it allows them to engage with that social element on their own terms. Same thing with combat. Some people, they might not understand the combat things their characters could do. Maybe you need to sit down with them and say, here are your options, here are the kind of things we can do, here are these elements of the game you might not be aware about that can help you get engaged better with combat. Great, that'd be awesome. But sometimes that's not it. Sometimes you're just going to come down to it and you're going to find out, I really just don't like the role play. I want to go and kill things. Or I really don't want to kill things, I just want to role play. Or whatever the difference is. This is a high magic campaign, I don't really like it, I really want a low magic campaign, this is a low magic campaign, I want a high magic campaign, whatever it is. So, but the only way you're going to find out what that is to talk to them. And it may be difficult and you may have to break the ice and you may have to take that hard moment to say, hey, we need to talk. The one thing with the internet is at least you could potentially do it through email if that makes you more comfortable. Maybe you can send out a nice text that you could lay out maybe more diplomatically or nicely if you feel like in person you're going to rush forward or you think you're going to not be able to address it in a way that's going to get you the responses that you want. Email is a good choice, but maybe you have to do it face to face. But of course, what you have to be ready for is that you're not going to be able to find that common ground. And it could be something that, with the common ground, that they're not going to come all the way to your side, and you're not going to come all the way to theirs, but you find that middle ground where everybody can be happy as a table, right? Get everybody together and say, okay, you guys love RP, you guys, on the other hand, love combat, so we're going to try to do it in the middle. I'm going to try to add more combat for the combat people, but I'm going to try to keep the socializing for the social people, and we're going to have to just understand that when we go to combat, this is for the combat people, so you social people don't, just stay with it, hang in there, and same thing, and see if you can find that middle ground, get everybody engaged the way they want to. And for you, the same thing, that, hey, I love role-playing, but I'm going to try to really get into combat because I know you guys like combat. Again, that's probably one of the, better case scenarios. You find that middle ground. It may not be perfect for everyone, but it's something everyone can sign off on. You can go, great, you can get back to gaming. But you're going to have to live with the fact that there's going to be those times in which you're going to have that conversation and you're not going to be able to find that middle ground. What you want and what they want are not a match. And that's when you have to make that hard decision. If it's the whole table and you're the outlier, that maybe you have to find a new table for your game, or you let somebody else GM and you play in that game, whatever you could find. Or if it's one player, that maybe that player is just not for your table. And that can be hard because a lot of times we're pulling in our friends, we're pulling in our family, we're getting all these people that we know, this circle, and we're saying, hey, come game with us. But not everybody, not all your friends, not all your family, no matter how well you know them outside of the game, are going to be gamers at all, and two, are going to be the kind of gamer that you want to play with. It's just like everything else. Some people like country music, some people like heavy metal, some people like classical music. You all like music, but when you're sitting down to listen to it, you know that, hey, I'm going to play country music. I know that that guy over there, my friend, I've known him for years, I love him, but he doesn't like country music. So for this, I'm going to bring another group of people, my country music friends. We're going to sit and watch that, listen to that, and then I'll listen to the other one when I, with that other person when I do that, right? We all compartmentalize our friends and family around the interests that we have. Within gaming, it may just be that you and this person, whether they're friend, acquaintance, whether you met them online, whether you're in person, just don't have the same interests as you. And the best thing you can do for all parties is, once you recognize that and you've reached out and you've talked to them and it's not coming together, it's not working, guys are not being able to bridge that gap, is just to cut it loose. Cut yourself loose, cut them loose. It may be difficult to say, well, I guess the game's not for you, sorry about that. Hopefully you find the game you want. Or you say, hey, this game's not for me and I gotta peace out because it's just not helping. It seems hard, it seems personal. Obviously you want to try to make it's because it's really not personal, it's just your interests. There's nothing against one person if your interests don't align. It happens. Not everybody loves the same things. So someone should not take it personally, and you should try to say it in a way that is not personal. But ultimately what you're doing is you're saving yourself, you're saving the other person from just being in a situation that's not as enjoyable as it could be. I think the phrase often goes around, no gaming is better than bad gaming, which is certainly true. But once you're in a group, you tend to stick in that group. And if the game's not awful, you're kind of like, well, I'll just stick in it. But it could be better. You wish it were better, but don't. And this is a way for you to try to get to that best game. You want to try to get the best game that you can get. So don't settle if it's not working for you. Don't just settle for it because you feel like you have to. Have a talk with the other people. See if you can come to something that gives everybody what they need to play. But if you can't, it's okay to cut ties. Sometimes that's the best thing, to cut ties. And then once you've learned this, and once you've played a little bit, and once you have a good understanding of yourself, use tools to try to avoid these problems by, having a session zero, being very upfront about the kind of game you want, the kind of game you want to play in, or the kind of game you want to GM, and all these factors about it. Write it up in a summary, tell everybody about it, because the more you can explain yourself up front and the more you can have that self-knowledge and communicate it up front, the less likely you're going to be blindsided by somebody having an opposite interest as you. Because if you go into the game and you go into the setup and say, hey, I'm going to run this campaign and we're going to do everything together, it's session zero, it's going to be a high fantasy campaign where you're all playing elves and it's all going to be like this, then you know what? If someone doesn't like that, any one of those things, they have a chance to raise their hand and hash it out right there. Or if it's in a document, just send back an email saying, hey, it's not my deal, but good luck. It's not going to be, okay, I've set aside this time and I've been investing in my character and now I'm getting into it and I realize it's not what I want. So once you have all this information, once you figure this out, try to be as upfront as possible, and that avoids you having to have the difficult conversations after the fact. However, just to finish this off, there are going to be times that no matter how well you set it up, no matter how well you think you communicate it, it's going to come up anyway. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're somehow failed in some way if you had a session 0, if you wrote up a really good campaign document, if you really bullet pointed all these things about how the campaign is and you get in it, and then a few sessions in or many sessions in, you realize you're having a bad time, or someone else is having a bad time, or you're both having a bad time, and you need to have this conversation. Because guess what? One, a lot of times we don't know what we want until we get into it. All our styles are different. Just because we both like high fantasy doesn't mean that my high fantasy and your high fantasy are going to be the same. All kinds of things can happen, so you never feel like if you have to have this talk that somehow you were some kind of abject failure. It happens. This is life. So have the talk. Hopefully work it out, but if you can't, don't be afraid to walk away. And on that note, I will talk to you later.